This is Ayani.
And this is Corinne.
And you're listening to Sex, Love, Literature, a pop culture podcast where we take a semi-scholarly look at why
and how
the sex stuff in media matters.
Prepare yourselves, because we are about to get deep in our feelings as we begin our discussion on the show Dying for Sex, starring Michelle Williams, Jenny Slate, and Rob Delaney.
In this first of 2 episodes, we start off with our initial non-spoilery reactions, think about how the show works from a genre and form perspective, and maybe rant a little about why one of the characters really sucks.
As a bit of a content warning, Dying for Sex deals with terminal illness and trauma related to sexual assault. Because these themes are so woven into the show, we won't be able to provide specific time codes for when they come up in our own discussion, but wanted to make sure that you know going in.
Were you also in your fifis about Dying for Sex? Let us know on Blue Sky, Instagram, and on Tumblr at Sex Love Lit Podcast.
And don't forget to subscribe to and rate our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of your other favorite podcast platforms.
All right, let's get started. Hello, SLL listeners. Welcome back to another episode of Sex Love Literature. We are so excited, as always, to have you here with us today. So, as you heard in the opening, today we're going to be talking about a show on Hulu called Dying for Sex, which I'm excited to talk about.
Yeah, just from the name, it kind of has us written all over it.
Right. One of my friends, shout out to Christine, suggested that I watch this show. And then I think, Corinne, you kind of came to it on your own. You were like, hey, have you heard of this show?
Mm-hmm.
And so we watched it and have a lot of feelings about it. So we're going to do an episode about it. But before we get into the meat of our conversation, which I feel like today is going to lead to a lot of accidental sex puns that aren't sex puns when we say them, but then become them.
But they are. They are.
Yeah. So before we dive in, just a little bit of business. We are in July, which is still a few months away, going to be doing another live podcasting event at Romanticon, which is going to be in Connecticut. We are super excited about doing this event. I know that there were special tickets sold for people to come and see us, which makes me feel really cool. I don't know about you, Corinne. But we're really looking forward to that. So we just wanted to remind everyone up front that if you are interested in coming to see Corinne and I in person and get some SLO goodies, get a ticket to Romanticon. Come hang out. So while Corinne and I both kind of finished Dying for Sex recently, as of the recording of this episode, I think, Corinne, you finished last week, and I literally finished maybe an hour ago.
Yeah, I've at least had some time to get over the emotional hangover. But
Oh, I have not. There will probably be tears while we're talking. However, there are a couple other things that have really been sparking joy for us over the last, let's say, 2 weeks or so. So why don't we do a round of what's sparking joy before we dive right into me crying on the mic? Corinne.
Great.
What's sparking joy?
What's sparking joy is when we talk about something that we are currently watching, reading, or listening to that is currently sparking joy for us. So, Ayani, what is currently sparking joy for you?
Okay, so part of the reason that I finished Dying for Sex very close to the start of us recording is that Andrew and I went to go see Sinners this morning. And by the time this episode releases, Sinners hopefully will still be in theaters and people should absolutely go see it. But as of recording, it is the opening weekend for this film. And I have to say, it was phenomenal. I have never cried through a horror film before.
Oh boy.
Yeah, but this in a lot of ways hit a lot of really salient touch points. Real quick synopsis before I go off the deep end here. But Sinners, according to Wikipedia, is an American period horror film written, directed, and produced by Ryan Coogler, who you all should know because of Creed, Black Panther. He did Fruitvale Station. Fantastic director. It's set in 1932 in the Mississippi Delta and stars Michael B. Jordan, Haley Steinfeld, Miles Canton, who this was his first movie I think this is his first acting role from what I'm hearing. Jack O'Connell, Wunmi Mosaku, Jamie Lawson, Omar Miller, Buddy Guy, and Delroy Lindo. So like stacked cast here. A lot of fantastic Black actors. And honestly, like the way Andrew has been describing it when we talk to people about it is kind of like a love letter to blues. And
Oh,
in a lot
cool.
of ways, yeah. It's doing a lot of really interesting things with music and family and lineage. And one of the things that I often joke about is that I'm an accidental horror scholar. And part of the reason I say that is because I am a big scaredy cat. Like, scary movies scare me for real. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
know, like, hey, Andrew, let's leave the light on for a little bit so that I don't think that the monsters are coming to get me, scaredy cat. But I find myself watching them anyway, which I guess is kind of the point of horror films, right? But this film played with horror in a way that not only was super interesting, but was super compelling and is a vampire story in and of that. So there's just a lot of great things happening. Since it's relatively recent, I don't want to like say too many spoilers because I want people to go and experience for themselves. But hands down, fantastic. Honestly, when we record what's sparking joy in 2026, this might be one of the things that ends up at the top of my list. So we'll see. But yeah, Sinners was really, really good. Also, LOL, we're recording on Easter and we went to go see a film called Sinners on Easter. But you know,
It's fine.
I appreciate the absolution, Corinne. But okay, what's sparking joy for you, bud?
So, what is sparking joy for me is something that Aoni has actually mentioned on the podcast before. And that is the anime Frieren Beyond Journey's End. I recently taught it in my fantasy class, and it was sort of finally the kick in the pants I needed to actually watch it. And it's so good.
I told you.
Okay, well, that's also why it was on my syllabus, okay? But it's just a really lovely anime. Really briefly, because again, Ayani has talked a bit about this, I think twice.
Oops.
Because it was in her What's Sparking Joy for our Lost You Forever episodes, and then she talked about it in her like year-round roundup.
Oh, you're right. Okay, yes. Then maybe don't talk about it too much. Go ahead.
Basically, the setup is that Frieren is a very long-lived elf who has done a quest to defeat the Demon King with three other, two humans and a dwarf. And for them, the quest was the most important thing in their lives. It was 10 years, and for her, it was a blip.
Mm-hmm.
So in the first episode, Himmel, who was the sort of the leader of their party, passes away of old age after the end of the quest. And then Frieren sort of realizes, oh, wait, I regret not getting to know him more. Like, what am I doing? And then the show follows her as she starts to retrace their path on their quest that they took at this point, like 70 or 80 years ago. It's beautiful. The music is beautiful. The pacing is like really sort of thoughtful and retrospective. The new apprentices that she picks up are also charming and very funny. Frieren is a delight. It also made me cry a lot of times. Because, and I will just say this briefly because, again, we've talked about this before and we are probably going to do an episode deep diving into it later this summer.
That is very likely.
But I just kept thinking about a line from the C-drama Lost You Forever about how another long-lived character says, like, if I can't have lasting companionship, brief is good too. And that is just what I kept thinking the whole show, as Frieren sort of like is navigating these relationships that to other people will be like a big portion of their lifetimes, but for her are just a moment, and how difficult it is for her to invest in those, knowing how soon they will end.
Yeah, I mean, and part of the reason why I thought you would like it is because of the pacing of the show and how much I was reminded of Lost You Forever in the kind of expansive spread of time, and how there is this attention to both the minute passing of time, but then also longer stretches of existence. So yeah, I'm so glad that it resonated with you, and I'm really excited to do kind of the Frieren episode because I think there's a lot to unpack there, as it were.
And then I did want to add as well that if you
Mm-hmm.
are listening to this around when we recorded it or when it drops, Frieren is also now available on Netflix, at least in the United States, instead of just on Crunchyroll. So it's more widely available even if you are not an anime person, and I highly, highly recommend checking it out.
I will say I haven't watched it with English dubbing, so I have no idea what the dub is like.
Okay, so I will say I didn't watch it with dubs. I watched it with subtitles.
Mm-hmm.
But my students said that as far as dubs go, this one is like pretty good.
Okay. I probably will not watch it dubbed, but
Oh yeah, I won't either. But like if you are not a subtitle person, this one will not be terrible. Although it does apparently affect your sort of understanding of Frieren as a character because the impression of how goofy she is changes depending on whether you listen to the Japanese or the English.
That's interesting. All right, well, we'll put a pin in that and we'll come back to it when we do a free rent episode because this is not a free rent episode. In fact, this is the Dying for Sex episode.
Indeed.
Indeed. So we have a lot to say about this show. Would it be fair to say it was an emotional roller coaster?
Yeah, I would say that. It was almost like an emotional tightrope.
Yeah. It was an emotional tightrope. If tightropes could like go up and down a little bit and you wouldn't fall to your doom, because there were a lot of like rises and falls, but a lot of very smart balancing that we will absolutely get into. But before we do that, for those of you that have not watched Dying for Sex and are looking to be convinced to watch the show, we'll give a little bit of a plot overview, we'll give some about the characters, and then a non-spoiler section so that you can kind of decide if you want to watch or not before we dive into our really, hopefully very thoughtful deep dive. Would you like to give us the plot overview, Corinne?
All right, so courtesy of Rotten Tomatoes, the premise of Dying for Sex is that after Molly receives a diagnosis of stage 4 metastatic breast cancer, she decides to leave her husband to explore the complexity of her sexual desires for the first time in her life with her best friend, Nikki, by her side. For some generally not literally by her side while she's actually doing the sex stuff, but more like an
important distinction.
By her side, like emotionally and like through her cancer journey.
Yes.
But anyway, it was based in part on a true story and a podcast of the same name that the real life Molly and Nikki recorded. And we will link to that in the show notes. The
absolutely.
Podcast dropped after Molly had passed away.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So this is a emotionally fraught, but also very, very good show that also has a lot about sex. So
yeah. Yeah. I'm going to try to hold it together while we're recording, but I make no guarantees. So here's a quick run through of the characters. So first we have Molly, who's played by Michelle Williams, who was fantastic in this role, I must say. And Molly is our main character, who's the one that is dealing with, as Corinne said, this stage 4 breast cancer diagnosis. Her best friend, Nikki, is played by Jenny Slate, who's also, honestly, everyone I think in the show was fantastic, so I won't say it every time. But Nikki is an actress. We're kind of given the impression that she's a little bit by the seat of her pants, but she is also bold and strong and will stand up for the people that she cares about. So we got Nikki. We have neighbor guy, who's played by Rob Delaney, who I will not get into too much, but he is Molly's neighbor who lives across the hall from her, and they get to know each other better. We have Sonia, who's played by Esco Julie, who is Molly's palliative care therapist.
Yeah, her palliative care social worker.
Social worker. Next up, we have Dr. P, played by David Rashi, who honestly grew on me throughout the course of the show. Dr. P is, I'm going to guess, Molly's oncologist, if we're going to put a specialty to it, right?
Yeah, he's her main doctor treating her cancer.
Right. We also have Molly's mom, Gail, who's played by Sissy Spacek, who is a character. And last but not least.
No, I would say he's least.
Oh, okay. That's why Corinne put him last. We have Steve, who is Molly's husband, played by Jay Duplass, who played the role well, but Steve kind of sucks. And we'll get into why Steve sucks as we get into our discussion. And there are other characters, of course, that come in and out throughout the show. I think there is a good sized ensemble cast, even though the focus is really on Molly and Nikki. And as other people come up, we'll mention them and share who they are and their importance and all that kind of stuff. So with that, why don't we get into our non-spoiler reactions?
All right. So since you just finished, like, less than 2 hours ago, Aoni. Do you want to start us off with your reactions to Dying for Sex?
Oh boy. So non-spoiler reactions. I really enjoyed this show and I thought it did such an interesting blending of being unapologetically horny and deeply sad, which sounds like a weird thing to say. And when I like describe the show to other people, I'm like, yeah, it's like they're doing a lot of sex stuff and I'm crying. So, you know, this is kind of referencing that tightrope that we talked about, but in a lot of ways, I'm really compelled by that kind of storytelling. I'm really compelled by stories that play with a larger kind of rounded understanding of what it means to be a sexual human being. And it's not just that, like, there is the focus on the sex, because of course there is sex in the show, right? That's not really a spoiler, it's in the title, but it's more that, like, sex can come layered with so much emotion, and it's not just the emotion of like, yeah, I'm excited to be having sex, or oh, I'm scared to be excited, but like, just like, I don't know, sex can be sad sometimes and still be enjoyable. It can, I don't know, it just takes on all these different, it can take on all of these different faces, and I don't feel like we see that in media all of the time. So I just found this to be such a compelling and well done show, in part because I think the actors carried it really well, but also it was well written. I did find it really funny. But also, like, you know, I didn't watch most of the episodes in the living room. So, you know what I mean? But yeah, that's some of my like initial gut reaction, right? I was just really compelled. I was really compelled and was along for the ride. And I will say something that I'm wrestling with is that this is in part based on a real story, but also I think because they recorded a podcast and they planned to put it out there, you know, it doesn't necessarily feel exploitative, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it feels like she had, like, real life Molly gave, I mean, I haven't listened to the podcast, I will say, but, like, because she, like, did the podcast, I think she also published a memoir, posthumously published a memoir. It sort of makes her private, she had already decided what parts of her private life were okay to make public.
Yeah. Which I think kind of makes the consent of it to me not feel so icky. Yeah. But what are your initial thoughts?
So I also really, really loved it. I will say when I first heard about it, my sort of initial reaction was like, this does not seem like it's for Corinne's. I don't really like cancer stuff or cancer narratives a lot of the time.
I was like, I don't think most people are like, yay, cancer.
No, more like cancer narratives I tend to think of as being emotionally exploitative of the audience. And I mean, this certainly made me cry, like, a lot. Plenty. But I don't know that it felt like it was exploiting Molly as a narrative, I guess. So, like, the other one that I think of when I think of, like, emotionally exploitative cancer narratives, the big one I think of is The Fault in Our Stars by John Green.
Okay. Which I've actually never read.
Have you seen it?
No. It looks sad.
Yeah, it is. It's really good. It's really sad. But it also, like, is one that, like, I am still perhaps a little bit uncomfortable with sometimes about, like, how it frames cancer. And, like, cancer is, like, a battle, and, like, I don't know. There's just some parts about it that like I'm not a disability studies scholar, but like there are some parts about it that like I just am like, I don't know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then also just like, given that the world is a lot right now, I wasn't sure I needed something that I knew would make me cry.
Yeah, I know there are some things I'm personally avoiding right now because I'm like, I don't think I can handle Black Mirror right now. Thanks. Handmaid's Tale, no thank you.
But that said, I think the way that this show balanced tragedy and comedy made it really, really effective.
Yeah,
and made
I agree.
It sort of like it wasn't maudlin necessarily. It didn't wallow in a way that like, I don't know, not that all cancer narratives do that, but like it did a really good job of going back and forth between comedy and tragedy in a way that like even when something got very, very sad, something like absurd or like very funny would happen. So like it managed to find a lot of humor amongst the tragedy.
Yeah.
I also loved the key relationship between Molly and her bestie Nikki. Who this isn't really a spoiler because it's in the synopsis and also happens very early, but like who is her caretaker for most of her illness, and having that at the heart of the show I thought was very, very valuable. And the show was just very interested in thinking about kinds of care and female friendship and the kinds of relationships that can sort of bear that weight of something like terminal cancer, but that also was thinking seriously about the cost of bearing that weight.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. And kind of in line with that, something that I thought was really compelling about the show is that I feel like even in those moments where it turned towards the comedic, it was taking everyone's emotions and reactions to things seriously, right? So even when a joke happened, it wasn't that like suddenly everyone just burst into revelry and it was fine. Like everyone's the weight of what people are going through is not like cast aside for the sake of comedy. You know?
I agree.
Is there anything else non-spoilery that we want to present people with?
Mostly just that you should watch this show.
Yeah, it is. We didn't mention this. It's on Hulu. So you should watch it if you have access to Hulu. And if you don't have access to Hulu, you should go to somebody's house who has access to Hulu and you should watch it.
But also, again, this is not a living room show.
No.
I was perhaps watching it in the living room. And perhaps just a story a bit at my own expense. I was in the middle of a particularly explicit scene. I was texting Ayani while I was watching it, and I was like, I hope my roommate doesn't come home while I have this on, but I'm gonna roll those dice. And then, of course, he walked in, and I, being a very normal person, panicked and turned off the TV. Which is not suspicious at all.
No, not suspicious.
So, yeah, just don't watch Dying for Sex in the living room, I guess, is all I'm going to say.
Yeah, if you live in a shared community space, if you live by yourself, go ahead. It's your living room. But, yeah, I didn't need to scar my mother-in-law. You know what I mean? Didn't need that in my life. I already watched Fanta G-Spot in the living room, and I didn't need to do this again. So.
Yep. Anyway. Watch it, but like either fully with somebody or by yourself.
Yeah.
With someone you can watch sex scenes with.
Yeah, like 100%. Yeah. Don't decide to watch this with your mom if you're not comfortable watching sex scenes with your mom.
Would not watch with my parents. Would not do it.
Absolutely
Could not do it.
No.
That sounds terrible.
No. No, I couldn't do it. I couldn't. Oh my God, especially not, I think from that first moment on. So you know what? I'm going to say that this is your line now, listeners. Spoilers are coming after this because I have something I need to say. Spoilers are coming. Spoilers are coming. Ha ha ha, coming. Everything's a sex joke. But spoilers are on their way.
Okay.
But especially that first, like, really sad blowjob.
Oh, that was...
Could you imagine starting this show with, like, your parents and then the sad blowjob happens in episode 1?
Okay, so for context, if you did not go away, watch the show and come back, Molly leaves her husband, like, kind of at the end of the first episode, but, like, for real, at the end of the second episode. But after she's found out she has this stage 4 cancer diagnosis, she and Steve have gone to couples counseling because she has a high libido.
I will say they went to couples counseling before she got the diagnosis.
So they go to couples counseling before she got the diagnosis because she has, like, a pretty high sex drive, which he is blaming on her medication. And she's like, but have sex with me, though. And then she gets the call with the diagnosis in the couples counseling. And then after, when she tells Steve, or, like, when she goes back home and, like, is talking to Steve, she wants to give him a blowjob, and then he starts crying in the middle.
Yeah.
So that is, like, the least sexy blowjob I have ever seen.
Yeah, I tried to describe this to my family, and they were like, what do you mean a sad blowjob? Is that possible? And I'm like, oh, it's possible. You just have to watch the show. I'm not going to describe it any further. But, you know, you can watch the show. Yeah, so not with that out of the way, but with I had to talk about the sad blowjob. It was right there at the tip of my mind. But one of the things that we wanted to think about in our discussion of Dying for Sex is kind of a bit about how the show works, right? We're going to be doing some thinking, of course, about, like, Molly's sexual journey, about her relationship with Nikki, about kind of, like, issues and questions of care, which I think are super important. But one of the things that Corinne and I just kept coming back to is, in a lot of ways, the show could not work, right? It could fall apart under the weight of what it's trying to do. And we found it super interesting that it actually came together in the way that it did. So we wanted to start our conversation with kind of thinking about why and how Dying for Sex works as a show. Obviously not as a podcast because we haven't listened to it. We can't speak to that. But how as a show it kind of comes together. So we've kind of already mentioned that we feel like it plays with tragedy and comedy, right? And it's walking
If
down.
I was going to pick one, I would pick comedy over tragedy.
Really? I might do a smush together and say it's like a tragic comedy, right? You know how they do kind of like those hybrid genres. But I'd love to talk just a little bit more about, like, how we think that's working, like, contextually, not just, like, overall it works, right? Because one of the scenes I'm thinking about, and this is in episode 1, so just in case anyone didn't listen to my warning about spoilers, but after Molly finds out that she has that, in a lot of senses, her cancer has returned, right? Because she had previously had breast cancer. She had been in remission for 2 years, and now it's come back. And when she finds out, she kind of runs out of her counseling session, goes across the street to this bodega in kind of like almost like a fugue state, and picks up a terrible, like, knockoff diet soda and is sitting in front of the bodega when Nikki arrives. And over the course of the sequence, she and Nikki try this terrible soda, talk about how terrible it tastes, but then Nikki has, like, a moment when she finds out that Molly has cancer and starts weeping outside
and not just that she has cancer, but that she will die from.
Yeah, that she's dying, right? Has a loud weeping fit in front of the bodega, which 100%, like, that is what I would do. So valid.
But especially because she's an actress, like, it's even bigger. Because she's just a big person, big personality.
With a big purse that's filled with all kinds of things. But the immediate outcome of her having this crying fit is the man who owns the bodega comes out and is like, what the fuck are you doing screaming in front of my store? And then she proceeds to have a fight with this man from the bodega. So they do this, like, incredible marriage of, they'll hit you with something like, I'm dying. Someone is dealing with the fact that their friend is dying. And then the comedy of just, like, being a person in New York City and the fact that Nikki is rising to the occasion to defend her friend from this man that's trying to kick them out from in front of his bodega, which also 100% is within his right to do. I felt a little bad for him, actually, but, you know.
It's very much a, like, cancer sucks, but life remains ridiculous.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Yeah. And I won't say it's like a farce, right? But it is very much dealing in the ridiculousness that is life, even while you're dying. I think that's, wow, you really hit on something there. That feels like correct.
Well, like, it's just there, like, there's so many other moments where it's like this moment has, like, reached the absurd.
Is there one that's on the tip of your mind?
Yeah, the one that there's two that I'm thinking about.
Please.
One is when Molly is in her sexcapades, sleeping with, or not, she's not, well, we also will talk a little bit more and think a little bit more about what constitutes a sexual relationship.
Yeah.
Particularly given, like, very real physical limitations that Molly has, particularly as her body sort of starts to, like, not serve her as well as her cancer gets worse. But, like, when she has a relationship with a furry, a man who likes to dress as a dog.
Hold on, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say he's a furry
Okay.
necessarily. He doesn't have a fursuit, which I think
okay, my bad. My use of terminology here is probably not going to be fully correct. He likes to.
We're having sexual conversations. I think we should use terms correctly.
So when they are having an encounter, I don't know, man.
Having an encounter works. I just thought it was really delicate. I saw you thinking it through, and you're like, having an encounter. Yeah.
When they are having he likes to dress as a dog and be treated as a dog.
In particular, I think it's Scooby-Doo. That looks like a Scooby-Doo costume to me.
Okay. Well, so anyway, one of his fantasies that he's had is that he wants to be peed on. Sorry.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. Go on.
But so, like, after she agrees to do that, her mom walks in on them.
God.
And then, like, so this was, like, a moment where it was, like, everything about this is absurd, but also very funny, because, like, the thing that was so funny about it, because, like, her mom obviously, like, did a huge trespass, like, is sharing Molly's information with far too many people, because Molly's kind of kept it on the down low that she has terminal cancer. But then, like, when her mom says, yeah, well, you better hope you didn't get it in your mouth, because you just had chemo, so her pee might be radioactive. But then they can't get the collar off.
They can't find the key. Oh, God.
And then this poor man starts having, like, a panic attack because he perhaps did get radioactive urine in his mouth.
God. Yeah.
But yeah, so Gail saying, well, I hope you didn't get it in your mouth was like, well, okay. This is where we are.
Oh, God. Yeah, no, it's almost like a little tinge of social horror, if that makes sense. Because this won't be TMI. So one of my cats has actually had radiation therapy for her hyperthyroid, and we actually had to dispose of her waste products immediately because they were radioactive. So like, even though Molly was like, I don't think this is a concern, part of me was like, I think you should ask somebody just to be sure.
Go to urgent care. I don't know.
You said that was an excellent example, but you said you had two, and now I'm curious what the other one is.
The other one is much more sad, but it's at the end when after Molly. So Molly does die at the end. Like, there's no miracle cure. Her cancer is terminal, and they take us to the end. But that she doesn't want to die with her mouth open. So she asks Nikki to close her mouth. And there are two parts to this. One is that Nikki is like, I will, but I need you to promise me right now that you won't bite me.
She's like, I know it's an irrational fear. Things are really intense right now. I just need you to tell me. You need to promise.
So but then after Molly does, like, take her last breath, and Nikki tries to shut her mouth, but it keeps opening. So she has to use her sweater to sort of prop her jaw closed, and then thanks her for not biting her. And that's how it ends. I mean, there's like another sort of like epilogue scene, but like that sort of like it's very sad. Like Molly is gone.
Yeah.
But she can't get her mouth to stay shut.
And it's like, it's funny, but it's so sad. But it's also, It's the ridiculous of life, even in the face of death, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oof. I guess that leads me to a question about like form. Is there
Mm-hmm.
anything about how the show is constructed that you feel really helps it to work? I know there's something that you've mentioned to me specifically, and there was something that I was thinking about too, but do you want to go first?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think really makes this show work is Molly's internal narration,
Mm-hmm.
which Michelle Williams does a fantastic job with. But like
Yeah. Hmm.
Molly is often very sarcastic and has very sort of
Yeah.
like sharp observation. She's very sharp observationally of people, and like
Hmm.
is also kind of like a little bit like tired of like the tragedy of it all,
Yeah.
and doesn't necessarily want to like wallow in that, but and
Mm.
also is trying to avoid wallowing in that, but just the
Yeah.
sort of like sharp inner humor that she has, I think
Mm.
makes a big difference in, or not makes a difference, but does a lot to shape the tone of the show,
Mm. Mm.
which is dependent both on Michelle Williams' like really sharp performance here, but then also on the really sharp writing. And I
Yeah.
wonder if that's something they also like were able to punch up in post, because
Oh.
like she could record however many different versions of like that in narration without having to like go back to filming. So that's a way that like I think the script writing both like could be very sharp, but then also
Hmm.
like could be modified or like edited or revised to make sure that it really was like very tight at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I hadn't even thought of that. And I'm also wondering if they pulled, I mean, because it's based on the podcast. So I'm wondering if they were able to pull some
Mm-hmm.
of her like direct language into the script. I'd have to look and see if there was anything about that. But I think that's a really interesting point, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's that kind of layering that happens there. And running with layering, thinking about the form of this, one of the things that I thought was really interesting was the way that the past bleeds into the present
Mm-hmm.
through the visuals. So, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but one of the, and I guess this is a bit of a content warning as well, but one of the through lines of the narrative is that Molly, as a child, was assaulted by her mother's boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways that that works its way through the show is we often see 7-year-old Molly dressed up for her ballet performance,
Mm-hmm.
interacting with adult Molly in a variety of ways, sometimes talking to her directly, sometimes like peeking out from the shower at her, you know. So
Mm-hmm.
child Molly is a presence in the story as kind of this constant reminder of something that happened to Molly. And then as the show goes on, we also start getting this image of her mother's former boyfriend. But the thing that's really
Mm-hmm.
interesting about him is that his face is like blurred and constantly moving. So you never see what
Mm-hmm.
his face looks like, which I think was expertly done, right? Because he doesn't matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
It matters what happens to her, but exactly what man it was doesn't matter, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But it also makes him more spectral in a way that
Yeah.
brings a bit of horror into the story. That's not just like the horror of disease, if that
Yeah.
makes
Well,
sense.
like that also I think another thing that is interesting about it,
Mm,
sort of like narratively, is that like Molly's life is not, even like in the face of stage 4 cancer, her life and her trauma is not all about her cancer.
right.
The rest
Hmm.
of her life and like the her other trauma doesn't just like stop mattering
Right.
because she has
Hmm.
cancer. And I think that is a good way to sort of incorporate that, and is also one of the interesting things that the show does, is thinking about this like childhood sexual assault that she suffered, but like in a way that balances it with the cancer. Like she's still a whole person with like other
Yeah.
things in her life
Yeah.
that are happy but also that are sad.
And it's interesting because she's on this like journey of healing even while she is moving towards death,
Mhm.
which is another kind of tightrope act that they walk the entire
Yeah.
time, right? That Steve Who Sucks brings up in the first episode. That like maybe he's not wrong for bringing it up, but it was in the context of like, I mean, he really sucks, but in kind of saying like, oh, you have a high libido because A, because of the medicine, but also B, because you haven't thought through what happened to you as a child. And it's like, wow, way to like throw trauma in someone's face, you fuck. Like, it also doesn't hurt that he's like a Pulitzer Prize winning author or something. He's like a prize winning author.
A journalist,
He's a journalist. I thought he also wrote like a book, like a memoir.
He might also have written a book.
There was something about the New York Times bestseller, I thought, but anyway,
he sucks. Also, like, I know we're not talking about Steve yet, but like, so with a note here that it is very nice of him to let her to not officially get divorced so she can stay on his health insurance. So like, one of the ways this show is like a little bit of a fantasy is that Molly never has trouble accessing care, and she never runs out of money.
Yeah, I think there are more than one ways that it functions as a fantasy.
Yeah. And think about like the cancer treatment aspect.
Oh yeah, the American healthcare system that exists in this world seems fantastic.
But Steve like gets off on being her caretaker in a way that is gross. Like he's like excited kind of when she gets her cancer diagnosis again, because like their relationship when they're like equals-ish and when their relationship isn't all about cancer was clearly on the rocks. Because my girl Molly has not had an orgasm in 10 years of marriage.
We'll come back to that, because you know how we feel about women having orgasms on this show, and that was my first thought literally when she said that. It was like, oh, your husband doesn't love you. Which is not fair, but also
But like his satisfaction from their relationship comes from taking care of her.
Right. And
in like a bossy way.
And I will also say one of the things that Molly is bringing to their therapy sessions is that, yes, she has a high libido, but he also won't have sex with her. And part of that is because he almost doesn't see her as like alive and living.
Yeah, he only sees her as a patient.
Yeah, because I think during the sad blowjob sequence, he like touched her breast, and I think that's what made him start to cry, because as Molly draws the connection, well, he says, you know, your breasts make me think of the fact that you have cancer, and I just start thinking about you dying, and she's like, so my boobs make you think of death. So he can't he will never see her, right, as a full woman again, which aligns with a lot of what you were saying before. Yeah. As more than just her cancer, you know? And that, I think, aligns with what you were saying about the way Molly deals with her trauma, is that she is a whole person, right? That the cancer is a part of it, but there's so much more there. And Steve can't really move past the cancer into everything else, except for throwing it in her face like a dickhole. If this has whet your appetite for Dying for Sex, you're
talking about how Steve sucks.
I mean, he does suck, and you all should join us in knowing how much this man sucks. So you should go watch Dying for Sex if you haven't. If you've listened through this episode, you said, fuck the spoilers, I don't care. We do really recommend checking out Dying for Sex on Hulu. We are continuing the conversation. This is not where we're wrapping up here. This is just kind of a break, because we knew this was gonna be a long episode if we only did one.
For once, we admitted ahead of time that this was not going to be a one-parter.
It's growth. We're growing as podcasters, I think. So we're going to pause our conversation here and come back to it in just a bit. Corinne, if folks need more SLL in between the breaks of these episodes, where can they find us?
You can find us on Instagram and Tumblr, and is there somewhere else they can find us?
I mean, technically on Blue Sky.
Podcast. Oh, and Blue Sky. I forgot. At Sex Love Lit Podcast.
And of course, wherever you get your favorite podcasts, you can always find more of our episodes there, just in case there's maybe more of a break between this one and the next one. And they don't just drop on the same day. We'll see. Life is busy. I get tired. But this has been Sex Love Literature, one half of a longer conversation about dying for sex. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye.
Were you also in your fifis about dying for sex? Let us know on Blue Scram.
That's new.
Blue Scram.